welcome to this week's episode of LevelUp Cyber. My name is Tony Bryan, your host and Executive Director of CyberUp. Looking forward and have kind of marked this discussion on my calendar for a couple weeks with our special guest, Sara Flores. Welcome, Sara.
Hey, good morning, good afternoon.
So really looking forward to this discussion. Sara and I had the pleasure of meeting kind of the tail end of 2023-ish. We were at a conference at Gateway Innovation. Shameless plug, coming up soon again here in St. Louis. So if you're looking for a great full day event, I'd highly recommend Gateway Innovation. We'll drop it in the chat today so you can check it out. But had an opportunity to meet there quickly, just kind of, found a level of adoration for her career, for where she's at. And thought she'd be a great opportunity to kind of share that with everybody and give some great advice. So I have the pleasure of knowing you, but let's help everybody else take a chance to get to know you a little bit more. So I'd love to have you tell you about, how you started, how you got into the career, and, where you're at today.
Sure, Tony. And hey, I've got to say, just starting out, I have such a good memory of meeting Tony outside of a conference room at Gateway for Innovation in St. Louis. He was just sort of sitting outside. I don't know if he was taking a break or looking to meet folks, but getting ready to go in and do a panel, and just the work that he does with CyberUp just really, it touched my heart. And so I'm super excited to be here today and share a little bit about my journey on taking a little bit of a non-traditional path towards leadership in cybersecurity. I started out my career as a developer and have just really touched so many different aspects of securing and understanding information in so many different aspects. I've done enterprise risk, I've been in privacy, I've done some data governance, and ultimately have landed in cybersecurity. So I've had roles such as I was an analyst, I was a consultant, chief privacy officer, CISO, and I'm currently the deputy CISO at First National Bank of Omaha.
And that's quite the career, right? And which is exciting to see, and I think it's just testament of, all too often everybody has this idea of I want to get into this and do this specific thing, and like really try to specialize. And I think that's okay, but there's so many areas that you just alluded to within a cybersecurity InfoSec career that you can pick 10, 20 different pathways, right? So I think finding that right one is best. So a great segue question into this, and I think just a line is, this idea of skills, right? You just described 5 different roles that you've done in the course of your own career, right? What things or advice would you give to individuals to really lean into this idea of professional skills and how to go out and find those things to ready themselves for maybe that first job?
Tony, let me take you back just a little bit in my career, because there's so many skills, professional, personal, etc. And a lot of times when we've taken a non-traditional path or taken the road less traveled, if you will, there are so many skills that you build along the way. And I want to highlight, a couple of things that I've learned throughout my journey, and also tell you a little bit about my journey, because you're right. There's not always this straight and narrow path towards a career in anything, in cyber or otherwise. I grew up in a really small town. I was the first in my family to go to college. And I'll be honest with you, I flunked out of college twice. I got it in my head, I'm so smart, I don't need this stuff. And so I kind of took a path towards just completely random, got into sales. And it was right during the e-com boom, and I started doing some development on the side. One thing I'll share is I was pretty young at the time, and I had my son at that time, and was really trying to find my way. Cyber was the furthest thing from my mind. But as I was kind of starting to get an interest in coding and web development, I thought to myself, you know what, this is fun. I think I can do that. And I hope that there are some people in your audience that feel that way too, that along their road less traveled, they've seen something in cyber that really piques their interest. And so my first bit of advice is, whether it's cyber or a particular discipline in cyber, try to find that something that gives you a spark. And so I had my son. We're kind of trying to decide where life takes us. And I thought, you know what, I can go back to school for this. So I was single mom. I was working full time. I'm in school. I remember working 40 hours a week, taking a course load of around 18 hours per semester because I needed to get that degree faster to take care of my son. And so he was just such a driving force in my educational path that's another thing that I would point out is find what your driving force is as you start to skill up, as you start to look for different careers, because having that motivation is so, so important.
That's great advice. It really, I mean, I think it's oftentimes, and I know even just for folks that have come in contact with us, it is a little overwhelming, right? Because there's so many different versions and things that exist out there, and really just and most people are just trying to find and carve out their way, right? And so, I think great advice on finding what is that kind of intrinsic motivation, or what is that thing that's going to drive you to find that level of success. I mean, and so you've interviewed a ton of people. You've started a lot of careers. You've coached and mentored along the way. The great answer for the first set of professional skills. But what other advice would you give for folks to like stand out, right? If I heard a couple weeks ago for an employer where they're getting 180 resumes for a job posting, right? How does somebody stand out in that type of scenario to really have the best opportunity to land that first job?
As you're talking about 190 applications, it's really difficult to stand out with that volume of applicants when you're solely relying on submitting applications cold to organizations. And so along my career, I have had a lot of I've had a lot of different folks that have supported me along the way, whether in a mentorship capacity or just making connections. And so I think my first piece of advice is don't rely solely on submitting applications. It's important to find someone who will advocate for you. It's important to I can't underscore the importance of having a good, solid network enough, because there are going to come times when you want to stand out in that 190 application pool. It's going to be really helpful if you've met someone at a conference, if you've met someone through a friend of a friend, or just connected with someone on LinkedIn. What I've had some folks do as they're applying for roles, it's really interesting how LinkedIn has become such a powerful tool. I've had folks reach out to me on LinkedIn because they're interested in a position at the organization I'm with, or an organization that I've been with, or even happen to have a contact who's at a particular organization, said, "Hey, Sarah, I just submitted my application. How can you help me make a connection within that organization?" And so the importance of combining that cold application with some sort of a personal connection, that first and foremost is what I would suggest in terms of helping yourself stand out.
The standout's hard, and the great advice on just having some of those personal connections, and it is hard, right? And I think the other thing to keep in mind is the Saras of the world. Your inbox and your LinkedIn inbox are flooded with sales pitches, so many other things. So it's really hard to sometimes stand out in all the noise that happens in some of this stuff. What advice would how can somebody stand out in the noise to kind of grab some attention from somebody like yourself to give that advice in that conversation?
Well, let's touch on the resumes first of all, because we can't discount the fact that there are going to be folks looking at your resume. First of all, and this is resume 101, don't make your resume too long. One page is fine. And when you're putting your resume together, sometimes I think folks, particularly if cyber has not been a linear path to their cyber career, sometimes we have trouble identifying the things we're good at. Sometimes we have trouble. There's this imposter syndrome, or sort of these thoughts that I I don't belong here. And I would strongly suggest having someone else review your resume, get that second set of eyes and that perspective of whether it's an advocate, a mentor, or just a member of your family who knows how hard you've worked to get to this point in your career. Sometimes it's hard to brag on yourself. And the things that stand out to me in a resume, you can really tell the folks who are confident in the skills that they have and are good at describing it. So I've heard many folks engage resume writing services that help do the resume reviews. But if that's not something in your toolkit at the time, a family, friends, mentor, someone you, like I said, someone you've connected with at a conference who's already in the industry. But it's your ability to confidently represent your skills. And I'm going to do a little bit of a tangent there in terms of it's not just cyber skills. I want to understand your leadership skills. I want to understand how you've influenced or brought people together. And I do think, again, for someone who has taken a non-traditional path, we get in our minds with this, we've got this ultimate goal. I want to be in cybersecurity, but maybe I have had other experiences in my life. Don't discount those other experiences because there are key traits. We all learn something different along our unique journeys. Some of that stuff, if you let that stand out in a resume, it's going to catch my eye. I'll tell you, it's the diverse resumes that have really stood out to me. It's really interesting to see not just your education, but the other experiences, the volunteer experiences. Those things jump out at me.
Great advice. The resume is an important part, and it is. We've seen 4 or 5 page resumes before, right? Like you're an entry level person and kicking out 4 to 5 pages. Probably not an ideal scenario where like 1 page is going to suffice, but I think also just the idea of having some clarity, having some focus. And I'm also just a really big fan. The advice I've always kind of received and given is, and we'll take our ESPN Sports Center top 10, right? Like what is your top 3 favorite highlight reels in your career, right? Take those 3 things that they would have a start and a finish and an end that you did something to, right? So you can package that into smart interview answers and just get intimately familiar with those 3 scenarios. And so then any question that anybody asks you, you automatically can take it back to that thing. You've got it kind of etched in your memory and it's part of your story, right? It's really part of your brand. I've seen some of the folks have come in our program, shout out to Christopher Taylor, who I think listens to this, right? That dude had his stuff branded. It was all burnt maroon. Like it was plain. It was just really, really good. Now, I don't think you have to always go to that level of, and it look good, but just having, what you say on paper translates to your interview, that translates to your networking events, and you kind of build that interweave that kind of story that you can just say on a dime that has a start and finish.
I love that you said the 3 things that really help you stay grounded, whether it's in an interview or whether that comes out in your resume. That's such good advice. There's something in the power of 3. I'm sure you know about it. Yes. Yeah. The power of 3, the 3 things that an individual can really keep forefront in their mind in a conversation or reading. I love that you said that. And the fact that make it a part of your personal brand, because it's not enough just to make the connections. You want to make an impression on those connections. Yeah. And I want to circle back to what you had asked earlier about how do you stand out with everyone's inboxes and LinkedIn boxes being so full. Mm-hmm. We talk a lot when we're giving advice to up and coming folks in cyber. Get out to the conferences. There's free stuff. There's low cost stuff, especially for students. Get out to the conferences. But one thing that has always stuck out at me for me, and I think some others that I've been on panels with, is when you're on a panel or you have a speaking engagement. When you're a conference attendee, you're out there, you're in the audience. When you find something that really strikes you or resonates with you, or a person that you just instantly feel a connection with, add those folks on LinkedIn right away. And within 24 hours of the conference, write a note. Hi, Sarah. Hi, Tony. I really enjoyed your presentation. I wondered if you might have time to meet with me. Flattery goes a long way. The connection, it's meaningful when you can tell as a speaker or a panel participant, you reach someone, because we're not up there for the good of our own career. We're up there to give something back, particularly at these conferences. You're going to make a connection, and you're going to demonstrate that the speaker or the panelist made a connection. If you follow up on that and you really emphasize that, it's going to be eye-catching.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you gave the story of, from our meeting, right? And so like, I knew I was attending your session, so I figured you were coming. I had not met you before. And so I sat there, honestly waiting for you because I want to introduce myself and have that and like to get a chance to meet you in ahead. And like, I'm glad it made a good impression, but some of that is, most conferences are going to have a list of your speakers and a list of your thing. Like, really pay attention to those books, right? Oddly enough, here's the Gateway to Innovation Conference that just happened to be sitting here on my bookshelf. But when you have the list of your breakouts here and it has who your speakers are, kind of go through your agenda, pre-plan your day, figure out who it is. Like, man, I really want to go meet Sara. If I'm going to go do that, it's going to be at 3:15. For me, I hate being the guy who stands in line after the panel discussion and they're 10 or 15 deep and everybody walks in and you're like, the panelists are just inundated and nobody's going to remember 15 people in a row. So like, it's really hard to stand out unless you do something crazy, right? To like be memorable for that person out of 15. And that's not generally the right way. You're going to be memorable for the wrong reason. So finding other ways to be intentional and make introductions goes a long way. Mindful, I've also been fundraising and relationship things for 20 years of my life. So it's just, that's a little bit more natural rather than somebody who's 20 who's trying to break into college, where there's a different level of, I'd say, confidence in that. But like, the point is, we're all people. You put your pants on the same way I do. Nobody's going to be angry for an introduction or asking questions, right? So, just don't, shake the cobwebs off, get rid of the fear and kind of lean into it. And then you have a positive experience and conversation with that person. You alluded to it a little bit, with the conferences. What other ways are there for folks to just expand their network and their center of influence of people that they're meeting? What are some ways that you would advise for that?
You said something, shake off the cobwebs, and it made me think of just having the courage to get out there and meet the panelist. And that sense of courage is really important when you're getting out there and starting to build connections. The conferences are great. They're not only great to make connections with the panelists or speakers, but people are at conferences for two reasons. I mean, one is the speakers and the panelists. The other is to network. And so you're just naturally in this environment where folks want to connect. I mentioned it before, friends of friends. There are a lot of folks out there in the cyber community and more. And you're going to know someone, whether it's a classmate, whether it's a mentor, whether it's a neighbor. Be courageous in reaching out to make those connections. I'm gonna go back to LinkedIn too. I know folks can get inundated with LinkedIn messages, but have the courage to reach out and make a connection. Have the courage to, when you do send out a connection request, put a little message in there about who you are and what you're trying to do. It's one thing to be inundated with vendor requests as a leader in cybersecurity. It's another when you genuinely see someone who's trying to come up in the field, because we know as leaders or tenured members of the cybersecurity community, I talk on this all the time whenever I have a chance to speak, is it's not enough for us who've been in the field long enough that it's not enough for us to contribute our knowledge. It's not enough for us to stay up to speed on emerging threats. We have to be lifting people up. We have to be bringing along the next generation of cybersecurity professionals. And so I think seeing those genuine folks trying to break into the field, we know it's our responsibility to help lift folks up. And so a good message, a genuine message out on LinkedIn, be brave enough to make the connection, be brave enough to put a little bit about yourself, and really advocate for yourself. That's so important.
Yeah, and I think there's ways. I know when I get a lot of sales, I don't think as many as probably you do or some of your CISO peers, right? But sometimes I respond, sometimes I archive. It just depends on the message. But and it's easy to generally filter it out. Or a request. My favorite's the request. You accept it, and 35 seconds later, you're thrown into a spam bot and trying to sell you something. Like don't do that, right? Like send an invitation to connect. Put a little context in that. Send the note and hope it comes back. If you have LinkedIn Premium or you get your couple free in-mails each month, pick and use those in-mails. As a guy who doesn't use his own emails for LinkedIn Premium, by the way, but use those in-mails to those employers and follow up, right? Hey, the invite connection didn't work. Don't get sad. They're getting inundated with a lot of requests. I think, my board president, who's a CISO, right? He's got hundreds of messages, he said, that he can't even get to on LinkedIn because it's just so much. So, the invitations are a little bit easier. The note that you include that invitation, stands you out a little bit and really just kind of convey that in a better way that doesn't come across as you're trying to sell somebody something. And that'll, be genuine, to your point, be authentic, be genuine, and be real with that person, and they'll help.
That comes out too, that aspect of being genuine in person. Be brave enough to reach out to someone at the conference, but also going back to your power of three, what's your brand, and be confident enough to talk a little bit about that brand when you're making the connection.
Yeah. The storytelling piece, and that personal brand, whether you're a gas station attendant or, a cybersecurity CISO in an organization, right? Having, to your point, the confidence and the self-brand and awareness you're going to bring to it, I think is just an important part of it. And everybody's going to vary. You're not going to be everybody's flavor of the day, and it's okay, right? Like you don't have to please everybody and how they're doing. I'm saying that more for myself than everybody else, by the way, but it is an important part. So like ongoing learning, right? Yes, there's CPEs once you're in it, but not that, right? Like what advice would you give? Like I'm new. I'm in my first job. Maybe I'm not in the most ideal job that I wanted, or I'm help desk and I'm kind of cyber adjacent. What things should I be looking at to kind of take that next step or try to help progress my career to that next level from where I start?
The answer that I think when folks ask that question, the answer that they get the most is get a certification. So that's a great answer. Get a certification. There's also a lot of free learning out there. So, shows like this. I love CyberWire. There's a lot of free education podcasts out there, and I want to emphasize the podcasts and a little bit of the social media. This field is changing so quickly every day. The certification's great for foundational knowledge. Some of the free courses out there, great for foundational knowledge, but it's the podcasts, the webcasts, following folks on Twitter. Those are the things that keep you up to date real time. And so it's going to be this combination of, do you have the right foundational knowledge, but are you staying abreast of the threat environment, new tools, et cetera? You're going to want to build some literacy around current happenings to complement the foundational knowledge. And I would also say, if you're in your first cybersecurity career, be a really good question asker. More often than not, if you're new in the field, folks are going to give you some time to ask some questions. So going back to being courageous, and the old cliche, there are no dumb questions. Ask the question, and be comfortable continuing to ask questions, not just in the moment, but as you think of things after the fact, go back, circle around, be a good question asker.
You said there's no such thing as dumb questions. I relapsed to my drill sergeant days in the Army, and there were dumb questions in the military. But in this scenario, I 100% agree, right? And it's just a matter of how do you package it. My kind of caution advice is, at least if you're going to ask the questions, do some due diligence on your part to at least have some frame context around it, right? Like don't immediately ask the question because everybody else is busy. So, like part of it, everything I've always been told is a big part of it is how do you go find and seek some of your own answers? And it's okay to ask questions, but how do you internally problem solve some of this stuff? And you find yourself get stuck. It's either okay to say, hey, I'm thinking about this way, is this right? Or, hey, can you help me with this? I've gotten a little stuck in where I'm at, right? So you're not asking somebody to do your work for you. You're really asking for that coaching and mentoring for them to take you to that next kind of step.
How about we say ask thoughtful questions?
There you go. That's a good one. I love the idea of questions, but so what advice would you give? Because that's scary, right? I'm there for a couple weeks. I don't, I'm on a new team. I'm afraid to look silly, and but I really have a question. What advice do you give to, to give me the courage, nudge me to go actually ask that question?
Well, first I would say be a good listener. If you're not in a place where you feel comfortable being a question asker, be a good listener. There's a lot to learn from other people. And in terms of building that courage, you're not always going to walk up to the CISO and ask a question. In fact, I don't know if I would advise it your first week on the job, but it's a little bit of a spin on those building connections. Build the connections in the workplace. Take someone to lunch. You can always ask thoughtful questions in a meeting setting or after the meeting, but sometimes you can ask more deeper questions and have more time to have a deeper discussion when you do take someone to lunch or happy hour or something out of the workplace. So if you're not ready to ask questions, be a good listener and consider starting to build some genuine relationships or deeper relationships with a couple key folks in the organization, so you at least feel comfortable asking questions to those folks.
We're going to take that one step further and add the word mentor to it, right? So what are some ways, in that scenario, because you alluded to it, what if let's say I want to go find somebody to be, we'll call my Yoda, right? My cybersecurity Yoda. What things or what should I look for? What would I need to maybe on my end gather to have that conversation with somebody I would like to be my mentor?
Tony, this is so kismet because I had a mentor who I call my Yoda, who taught me the most important things when looking for a mentor. And the first thing is having chemistry with that person. I was pretty young in my career, and I thought, you know what, I need a mentor. I'm a very sort of black and white thinker sometimes, so I was in execution mode. Who will it be? I will ask them to be my mentor, and it will progress in this very organized fashion. And met with the person, and the chemistry was just not there. It was a decent conversation, but you could tell it didn't flow in a way where we knew we were going to enjoy each other's company going forward. So that leads to the second piece of advice: is any mentorship is going to be mutually beneficial. Any mentor-mentee relationship is going to give something to each person. And so you want to find a relationship where where you're getting something from the mentor, but it's going to be really fulfilling when you start to see that you have something to offer too. And I'll underscore that you will have something to offer. Even if you're new in the cybersecurity field, you've had an experience, and you've had an experience that's going to be valuable to another person at some point in time. The third piece and final piece is trust. When you're in a mentor-mentee relationship, there are going to be a lot of really raw, vulnerable conversations at some point. I mean, it's not just about career advice. It's about handling sometimes the emotions that come along with a failure, or hitting a brick wall, or work-life balance. It's not always going to be about skill sets. And so you want to have a relationship that evolves into a really trusting relationship over time. In terms of finding a mentor, because that was a good question. How do you find one? I get asked that question all the time. It starts with building a genuine connection with someone, an introduction, building your brand, being your authentic self. And sometimes it will just happen organically. Going back to what I said about it's our job as seasoned cyber professionals to lift others up. you're probably going to see more and more of that happening. I'd like to think so. So sometimes it's going to happen organically, but I mentioned earlier, sometimes I'm sort of a black and white thinker. I'm going to do it in this particular way. That's okay too. That's 100% okay. If you walk up to someone who you feel you've just someone who you really admire, you think has something to offer, and say, "Hey, I'm looking for a mentor. Could we meet? Could we have lunch?" The one piece of advice I would leave you with on the mentorship, seeking someone sort of in that very direct, will you mentor me? Oftentimes we rush into, we're going to need to meet once a month. We're going to need to meet once a quarter. Don't box yourself into that right away, because you're going to want to see if there's a need to meet that often, if that chemistry is there. So don't go straight from, will you be my mentor, to saying, I'd like to set up time over a regular cadence. Ease into it and make sure it's a good fit.
Yeah, my last piece, mentor mentee is really hard. I mean, it's is part of apprenticeship, but an individual mentor mentee relationship, to your point, requires an incredible amount of intentionality. The chemistry is such an important aspect of just how that relationship between those two people go. But the only piece I would add is just, setting expectations early and setting the parameters around that and what you both hope to achieve in that relationship. And to your point, I know quid pro quo is a bad term, but everything in life is about quid pro quo, right? Everybody wants something from somebody, whether they know it or not. So, how do we make this a win-win for both of us, where I'm going to help you and then, hopefully make a lifelong friend. So having that chemistry is such an important part. And also just the expectations. I hope to achieve this by here. What's that accountability? And what are your normal checkpoints along the way of assessing your progress towards that? And then not it doesn't have to be every week, every month, but what's the frequency in that? And honestly, just the idea of Zooms and virtual meetings make that so much easier anymore, to hop on and have a quick question. Hey, Sarah, I was kind of stuck last week and I bounced something off you real quick. Great. Here's 10 or 15 minutes. And I found, hell, a phone call doesn't have to be a Zoom. It can be a quick phone call, just a quick balance check, right? Or a wellness check there. So all great stuff. We're at 30 minutes. It goes fast, as it always does. So much like every show, we get the same last question. What advice would you give to folks to level up their cybersecurity career?
That's a tough one, Tony, because I feel like we've talked about all of the things that are really, really important. The leveling up, I think I would say, give, like we talked about earlier, give yourself credit for all of the things that you've already accomplished in your career or in your journey, and get used to the fact that you will be learning every single day. There's going to be a lot of information to absorb. Someone once told me that if you're getting into cybersecurity, you better be a good reader. You better love reading. And so being a lifelong learner and getting used to the fact that you are going to need to spend some time, some time that might be cutting into your personal time. This is a commitment. This is an investment, and it's going to be super rewarding all the way along. Going back to what we talked about earlier, finding something that really drives you, that you're really interested in, it's going to make the lifelong learning much easier.
It also, the quick pace in which you can make six figures and a fine income is also, is an incentive and a target to kind of move towards that professional development, right? Which is the nice thing within the career, is that it does have a lot of upward mobility and just space to grow into. And so I think that's what has always attracted me to this, beyond just the camaraderie of the sector. That's part. Everybody's so kind across the board, which I think just reiterates the conversation we've had for the last 30 minutes of people genuinely want to help. They're nobody's worried you're going to take their job, right? Because there's enough jobs that are out there. So it's really intent. There's so many people like Sarah that want to grow the industry, and out of not just because we have to, but simply because it's a necessity for our critical infrastructure and all the things that are part of it. So such incredible advice for those that are listening. I encourage you to reach out to Sarah, introduce yourself, be patient. If she gets a lot of messages, then of course, it might take some time, but there's lots of great folks and that have come across Sarah. It's just a great top-notch example of those individuals. So, Sarah, thank you so much for joining us today. Really appreciate the show and just the time we spent together. Look forward to seeing you in Kansas City in a few weeks at the Secure World Conference. And we'll shamelessly plug, we'll be talking to Drew with Secure World in a couple weeks on our show. So, conferences, we kind of hit it a little bit here, but are really an important part of just your professional development journey in the sector. So again, Sarah, thank you today.
Thanks for having me.
For listening, and have a great week.